Good afternoon and welcome to Willow's Green Permaculture. My name is Stephen Dixon, and today I'd like to talk to you about water. Specifically, I've had subscribers and I've had friends who've talked to me about the fact that they're living through a drought in their area, or there's been almost no rain, and they're really having a rough time with their gardening. And I've also had friends who've spoken to me about the fact that they water every day and yet their garden is just not flourishing. And so today I'd like to talk to you about how you can set up your garden and how you can work with nature so that your garden can resist drought, and also how you can set up your garden so that you need to water as little as possible. I'm going to take you around the garden and I'm going to show you the areas and how often we've watered, if at all. And I'm going to show you the strategies we use to help maintain the moisture in the soil and also to help our plants have the deepest roots possible. So if this is something you're interested in, then let's get started. So we'll start right here in our Three Sisters patch. Today it's July 27th, I think. So we're really right in the middle of the summer, and what often people call the dog days of the summer. It's sort of the hottest part of the summer, often the least rain part of the summer. And this is a good spot to start because you can kind of see, I'll show you in a minute, you can see the soil, you can see the tops and so on, you can see how healthy everything, how it's all growing. And one of the strategies that we use for keeping moisture in the soil and protecting the roots of the plants from drought and from too much heat are the weeds. The weeds, and also any kind of ground cover. Now with the Three Sisters, the ground cover is our squash. Now you don't see too many squash here. It is growing around here. There's more growing in the Three Sisters that are in our pumpkin patch. The corn and the beans are so thickly planted here, and I planted the squash a little late, so it's gotten a little late started. There's a little bit here and there's a little bit here. I'll show you in a minute, and it's starting to expand. But the beans and the corn are very, very thickly planted, and they're everywhere. I can no longer walk through my paths in here, and they're completely covering the soil. And I've spoken to you a lot about the fact that there are potatoes that grow here, and it's been at least a few weeks since I've weeded out the potatoes that grow in this section, and so they are also helping to keep the soil shaded from the sun. This is one of the areas that I haven't watered in over a month. I haven't watered this area since not long after I transplanted the corns, beans, and squash. And so we're probably talking about mid-June. Mid to late June is probably the last time I watered here, just after I transplanted. And so it's been about a month. And as you can see, everything's growing really well. And the beans are starting to come out, as you can see. Got the beans, and there are corn cobs on here. I'll show you. And as we go through, I'll show you the other areas that we haven't watered in at least a month. There are also some areas that we have watered, and I'll show you those and why we have watered and how often. Here's the same view you were looking at. And so as I said, the squash are just starting to develop, starting to spread around the base of our plants, starting to take up the space they want. Some areas that they can still expand into, like where that watermelon is. The corn, as you can see, it's starting to grow its ears, and the beans are nicely wrapped around the corn to keep it tightly in place so that the raccoons can't tear it down. You can see these vines everywhere. They're surrounding everything. And the vines go right up to the top of the teepees. No longer really see the teepees anymore. And as you can see, the ground is completely shaded everywhere. Right next to our Three Sisters, we have one of our 2 pepper patches. And as you can see, the peppers really shade the soil well. The peppers aren't mulched because when they're small, they require a lot of heat to get growing. And so I don't mulch them when they're small. And then when they get big enough, the plants themselves provide enough shade to keep the soil protected. And I let other plants here and there grow. Like for instance, you can see there's some buckwheat growing there. And I have the odd sunflower. There's some parsley and a bit of cowboy toilet paper there and some borage. A few plants here and there to help keep the peppers shaded. And then along the edge I've got some cepiche as well and some marigolds. And so the soil is shaded here. I didn't mention it in this section while I was recording. The peppers, I've only watered them once in the last 4 weeks to a month. I watered them when they were much smaller, just to help them get to that thicker state where they were shading the soil. Otherwise, the rain was enough. Now, next to the peppers, we have our potato patch. You remember how the potato patch, to be very, let's say the beginning of June, I had to replant a number of potatoes because only about 3/4 of the patch had potatoes growing in it. However, that strategy I used to plant my potatoes at harvest time in the fall, well, this is what happens. So here's my potato patch, one corner of it anyway, and I'm going to show you what's going on here. First of all, look what we have here at the base. I'm just going to grab a bunch. Leaf mulch, a lot of it. This leaf mulch has been there since last fall, and then I added some in the spring that I took off of other parts of the garden, like the pepper area. So, why is this an advantage? Apart from the fact that the leaf mulch, of course, keeps the ground moist and shaded, prevents the ground from getting too dry. If we take some of this, look at this. You can see there's moisture in there. Okay, some of it's dry, but the darker stuff is very moist. The dry stuff is what's on top, and then what's underneath stays moist. And all the air in the middle, in between, really insulates it. So, and of course, whenever, like we've got some sow thistle here, and whenever I'm weeding, I just take it, all right, and I just stick it anywhere open on the ground, open ground, and I'll use it to cover the ground. Especially if it's a sunny day, because that means these roots are gonna basically dry up. I make sure the roots, to make sure the roots aren't in contact with the soil, but I don't think they're gonna re-root. Not during the growing season anyway. Maybe if they get covered with mulch, they might re-root. So I just take this and put it on the soil. So I use my weeds. You can use your weeds to as well keep the soil good and shaded. However, as I said earlier, I plant my potatoes when I harvest them in the fall. And so basically the same tunnels that are already there when I've harvested my potatoes, like the ground is all churned up, and so I just throw a whole bunch back in, throw the ground back on top, and then I throw a nice good thick layer of leaves on top of that, and then I just leave it alone all winter. And we were lucky, we got over 4 feet of snow this past winter, and then the spring the snow melted slowly, which was also good. And so when the potatoes started to grow, the ground had a lot of water in it. The snow was able to really melt slowly and be absorbed into the ground rather than melt quickly and get washed off by rain or whatever. Now that wouldn't really happen here in this garden because it really contains the water. But, so how does that work then? So not only is it advantageous that we've had the mulch on there all winter and it's absorbed all the moisture from the snow and the spring rain, and it's absorbed it into the ground. But then what happens? Well, then the potatoes start to grow sometime in the spring while the ground is still very much full of water. And because I know it's full of water, and I can really tell because I walk around barefoot, so I can feel how the ground feels, especially this part of the summer. While I'm working a lot, I might not be barefoot because my boots help me sit like this comfortably. Right now this isn't very comfortable because I'm not in my boots. I can't sit on my heels when I'm barefoot. I kind of have to hold myself up like this. Anyway, so the ground is moist in the spring and the potatoes start to grow. And because I know the ground is moist, even on a sunny day, well, I'm not going to water them. In fact, I have not watered these potatoes once. I didn't water them when I planted them last fall. Of course, I didn't water them in the winter. I didn't water them in the spring. I didn't water them at the beginning of June when I planted some new potatoes in there to fill in the area that hadn't been full. And I haven't watered them since. This potato patch has not been watered once. Now, I should give you the context about the rain. In the last month, since let's say the middle of June, we've had about one good rain a week. And that's enough. But this is an important message to those of you who are tempted to water every day. Now, if you're in an arid environment, I understand, and maybe it's necessary. I have lived in an arid environment. I lived in Oaxaca, Mexico, and one of these days I'll get a video out about my garden there, which I also didn't water every day. There was no way, because the garden was above the house, so it was not on the roof, but it was up the hill above the house, and so there was no running water there. No, I didn't have running, anyway. So we've had rain once a week. And that's been more than enough. And these potatoes have not been watered once. And you can see how well they're doing. Why? Because in the spring, they started to grow. There's a lot of water in the soil. And as the water, because I didn't water, as the water in the soil began to recede and go further down and further down and further down as things started to dry up, going into the early summer and so on, and now midsummer. Well, the roots were able to follow that water down. And because I disciplined the plants without watering them, the roots had to follow that water down. Whereas had I been watering them every day, the roots would have stayed shallow. And when you water, there's not nearly as much water as when it rains. At least when I water, I don't water deeply when I water. I just water by hand. It's just a superficial thing. When I do it, it's a temporary measure. And I'll explain where I've watered. But when you don't water, you're forcing the plants to find the water. And so, but you obviously have to know the conditions of your garden and know if there's water in them. And things that help, of course, are planting in the ground. Because if you plant in raised beds, you have to water more often. They dry more quickly. Although you can surround the bases of your raised beds with other plants so that maybe they don't dry up as much as well. But plants that don't cut off your access to the raised beds. But when you're planting in the ground and you use mulch and weeds as another mulch, as a green mulch, and things like comfrey and yarrow as another type of green mulch. But you see, so there's lots of nutrients in these plants. So you'll pick them and you put them at the base of your plants. They're shading and they're providing their nutrients to the plants. So that is how you can help your plants be drought resistant. It's by training them to grow the deepest roots possible. As they're growing, knowing how much water you have in your soil, it's training them to go after it, go looking for that water. And you can tell if they found it or not because you're gonna see that they're thriving. But if you water them every single day, then they're not going to thrive. They're going to keep shallow roots. What you want is your plants to have deep roots. And I'm going to show you other areas. Like obviously potatoes are a plant they're kind of like a vine and they stay low to the ground and eventually they fall over. And so they naturally also just by themselves shade the ground. But of course there are other plants like tomatoes that there are other things you can do to keep the ground shaded. So I'm going to show you that. Now we're going to go to other parts of the garden, and I'm going to show you what I've watered. So as a recap, the three sisters I haven't watered in over a month. The potatoes I have not watered once. Let's continue on to the next parts of the garden. Now let's look at our tomato area and what we've done to help shade the soil and help our tomatoes have the deepest roots possible. Before I do that though, I'd like to show you what they could look like. Here we have some garden huckleberries. These things right here. They're in the nightshade family. They're in the tomato family, tomato and pepper family, and potato family. And look at the ground around them. The ground is very bare, actually. And that's only because we had a lot of onions growing in the ground when I put these garden huckleberries in. But I have since harvested all of those onions. So, and they were pretty big, and so they were really shading the ground well. And so I really need to get in there, and I need to mulch this. However, garden huckleberries are a very, very strong plant and naturally drought resistant, because the fruit is pretty small, and it puts out a lot of it, but it's a very, very drought resistant plant. Grows like a weed. And so at the moment we've got a few beets down there, and we've got some parsley, a bit of borage. I did put this amaranth in there about a week ago, just because it was empty, and I thought I'll put that in there. And so if we have a look again at the tomatoes and contrast them to the garden huckleberries, you can see there's a big, big difference. Oh, there's a sunflower growing here. Big difference in the soil. Now with the tomatoes, I purposefully set up the companion planting so that it would last the whole season. And I forgot to mention, in the last month, I have only watered the tomatoes once. So what have I done here? I planted carrots in little pots. They weren't necessarily to have carrots to harvest to eat. They were from homegrown seed, and so as you can see, a lot of that homegrown seed bolted, and that's because there were a lot of plants in each little pot. And so when the plants, when they get stressed, when carrot plants especially get stressed, they will bolt and go to flower and go to seed, but that's fine. That's kind of what I wanted anyways. These were what you could say, carrots give an abundant amount of seed, but they're often a mixture of cultivated and wild carrot. It's really hard to isolate them from wild carrots, so they don't usually give the best carrots. And so, but they're a great plant to plant by your tomatoes, because look what they've done here. Look what these carrots have done, but not just only the carrots. Also, there's lettuce here. Lettuce that we harvested for about 2 months and then finally let it go to flower. It's already gone to flower. Now it's making seeds. Got lettuce. Oh, we got a bit of sow thistle here going to seed. But yeah, there's lettuce here, and of course there's dill as well. And what you can notice about all this dill and this lettuce and the carrots is they're all almost as tall as the tomatoes. All these tomatoes here, they're all my height or a little taller. They're going to be, pretty soon they're going to be 6 feet tall, these tomatoes. And these trellises I've made, well, I just keep adding pieces of wood as they grow taller and taller so that I don't have to tie the tomatoes. I just like to have them, they grow through all the wood, and they kind of stand up naturally and they don't fall over. So what is all this lettuce and carrots and dill, what's it all doing? Well, it's keeping, once again, it's helping keep the ground shaded. It's also helping make sure that when we have rain, the water doesn't splash up from the ground onto the tomatoes, because that can be a little bit problematic. If your ground if you don't have mulch at the base beneath your tomatoes, then you can have problems with fungal disease that can come up from the ground, because the water splashes off the soil onto the plant, and that can sometimes cause problems. That's why a lot of people will cut their leaves at the bottoms of their tomatoes. I don't bother to do that because, as you can see, I don't even have that much access to it, but I don't need to have that much access to it. And so all these plants help shade the soil, but not only that, these are mostly indeterminate tomatoes, not all of them. And so what these plants are also doing, if you can see this lettuce here, it's holding up this stem. And actually just the other day, this stem was coming out the other side of this piece of wood here. Well, because the lettuce was holding it up, it wasn't falling all the way down to the ground, and I was able to lead this stem back to that side of that piece of wood. And then here, where the trellising ends, well, we've got this lettuce here holding up this tomato. And this mustard here is going to help hold it up too. And so the lettuce and the dill and the carrots, they all do that as well. They help shade the soil. They help the tomatoes stay standing along with the trellising. And also, they're all, well, the dill and the carrots are aromatic, and they benefit the tomatoes in many different ways. In fact, carrots and tomatoes are really good companions to each other. The carrots help repel the pests of the tomato plants. Here's the other side of the patch. More carrots. There's a sunflower there. More lettuce. More mustard. And so on. And more dill back there. And of course, lots and lots of tomatoes. It's hard to see them, but there are lots of tomatoes growing in here underneath. Because they're still green, it's hard to see them, but that's all right. They're doing real well. Keeping a close eye on them, and I tickle the tomatoes from time to time. So when I do that, I'm trying to tickle all the tomato flowers to help them get pollinated if there isn't enough wind or maybe not enough insects on certain days, especially if it's cool or something. And so while I'm doing that, I'm having a close look at the tomatoes. And actually this time of year, end of July, it's the tomato hornworm time of the year. But I don't see any here. And that's most likely because they basically haven't found them because of all these carrots and lettuce and mustard and dill and sunflowers. But we'll see. The other thing is, as I've already said, I don't really prune my tomatoes. I don't pull the bottom leaves off, and I don't prune the branches. Some people like to do that because it'll give them bigger tomatoes, but it'll also give them fewer tomatoes. And I like to have lots of tomatoes, and also because I don't prune them, if I do get the tomato hornworm, well, then the tomato hornworm will prune the tomatoes for me. And there's so much greenery on them that even if I'm gone 24 hours and I come back, they should be fine. Whereas if I really pruned my tomatoes, like some people prune them where you practically all you see are the fruit and you see almost no leaves. Well, if I were to do that, the tomato hornworms can basically decimate the plant in a few hours, and you've got no more tomatoes afterwards. I'd rather just let them do the pruning for me. And then I find them, and then I go and put them somewhere else I'll find some wild nightshade plants, whatever they might be, growing, and I'll put them there, and either they'll just live there with those other plants and maybe some tomatoes that are growing wild in places that have self-seeded or other plants, and maybe the birds will eat them too. Here's another section of the garden that I have not watered in over a month, since near the end of June. And this is where we have the tallest plants there just in front of the grapes. They're now starting to hide the grapes. The tallest plants are the coral sorghum back there and the popping sorghum. And then the medium-sized plants in front of them are the dwarf sorghum and the millet. And then in front of them, we have some barley, which is now, it's all starting to fall over, which is the indicator that it's time to harvest. So I'll be harvesting these in the next few days. It's kind of all hiding behind these marigolds now, protecting them. And then down front, and we have our amaranth, and we've got some kale here. Now this kale is getting a little bit eaten by the insects, but that's okay, because the thing is, with kale, I'll harvest it a little bit through the summer, but the heavy kale harvesting time is the fall. And why is that? It's because I like to let my kale grow really strong, really tall, and then in the fall, that's when I'll start to harvest it. As well in the fall, well, you got less bug pressure here anyway, because it's just cooler. Because I can harvest the kale right up until December. I've actually harvested kale right up until February, some winters, mild winters, where the kale got covered in snow, but it wasn't too cold as well. And so I would harvest the kale under the snow. And so I like to let the kale grow and do its thing, and if it gets a little bit eaten by the bugs, that's okay. This has been a really buggy summer, which is fine too. And so once again, but as you can see, you can't see the ground here at all. It's completely shaded, totally shaded. And but however, lots of sunlight coming from above. Yes, the grapes are shading the east side of these of all this grain, but the west side and the south side isn't shaded. And that's one thing about grain is it's very, very drought tolerant. Pretty well all grains. As you can see, they're some of them are starting to form their heads now. I'm looking forward to seeing that. So I've shown you the peppers, I've shown you the grain here. Now let's walk past the peppers and the grain, and I'm going to show you an area where I have watered a couple times recently. We'll walk past all this beautiful apple mint and our other pepper section, which I also have only watered once in the last month, like the other pepper section, just because the plants were still fairly young. But now, here's my watermelon section. This is one of the watermelon, or one of the last plants that I transplanted. And this spring, well, I was a little bit slower with everything this spring, and I got a little bit behind, and so I transplanted these really late. I think it was almost the end of June. I don't remember exactly when it was, but it was much later than usual, at least by a week. And the really dry summer weather kicked in very shortly afterwards. And so when it's dry, I mean, watermelon needs water. And so even though there is water in the soil here, when it's young, you need to water it. And so I've been watering this watermelon about once a week. So let's say I've said that we've had rain about once a week. In maybe halfway between the two rains, I might come and water the watermelon. I think there was a period of about 2 weeks I didn't water them at all. And I was letting some of these tomato and ground cherry volunteers grow. But I was getting too many ground cherry and tomato volunteers in here. So I came, like here's a tomato volunteer right here. I came and I weeded them out because I just had too many. But I still left a few. There's a tomato volunteer there and a couple more ground cherry volunteers. There were just too many. I didn't want them to shade out the watermelon, so I weeded them out. And then, of course, as soon as I weeded them out, the ground started to dry up much more quickly than had I left them there. But had I left them there, it would have been fine for, the ground not drying up, because they would have helped shade the ground, but they would have taken all the water, or lots of it, from the watermelon and also shaded them out so they don't grow as well. And so I had to weed them, and because I had to weed them, and I have leaves here that I could use, and actually I might just take some of these. Take some of these leaves right here, which I often reserve for my squash, showed you in the last video, and just mulch the soil like that. Take some more. Pull that out, there's some creeping Charlie, and just put that down and mulch the soil. So later I'm going to take some more, and while I'm down here, well, let's pull these weeds too. A whole bunch of weeds. A tomato and a couple other things. All sorts of stuff growing here. There's lamb's quarters growing here too, but I'll leave the ground cherries. Anyway, so this is one, the watermelon is one plant that I have been watering about once a week. Maybe once every 2 weeks if we've had a lot of rain. But this is just one section of our garden. Now, next to it, there's all that wild bergamot, and then there's the Three Sisters patch. But of course, right next to all of that, so on the other side of the watermelon, is where we had our garlic. And so this is another area that I have been watering. Actually, this area, because I only just transplanted that squash and sowed the buckwheat shortly after harvesting the garlic, well, we've had very little rain, like I said, just once a week. Although once a week is enough. But when you've sowed plants and when you've transplanted plants, it's important to water them. So I've been watering them about twice a week since the transplant. But that's it. And but as you can see, the buckwheat is growing well. And basically, when I'm watering, well, I'll show you. I've got some images showing me watering it. I'll show you that right now. I don't actually water the whole thing because I water at ground level, and so mainly I'm just aiming at all the squash. The buckwheat, I water some of it, and I don't bother watering some of it because buckwheat is a grain, so it doesn't need to be watered all the time. It's naturally drought tolerant. This is a small area of the garden that I've watered maybe twice in the last month, and these are our Caribbean or our Guadeloupe cucumbers. Special type of cucumber. Got a few of them developing here. Look at this. Isn't that beautiful? When they start to look yellowish, that's when they're ready. And they look prickly, but the whole thing is edible. Marigolds and calendula and cosmos and chamomile around them. I think there's also chipiche. Let's look at our cabbage. It's starting to form heads. This red calabash I find really, really beautiful. They form quite large heads, and they'll be ready. Well, maybe not for another 3 weeks, but they're quite beautiful. And cabbage needs a lot of water, but these cabbages I have only watered maybe twice in the last month, if that. I think it was actually only once that I watered them, but once again I watered them individually using this right here, this thing which reaches all the way down to the ground for me. I've shown it to you before. So I just water at the very base of the plant, not water in the whole garden. And so I've done that once, maybe twice since let's say since the beginning of July. Well, once again, what do you see? Well, what you don't see is the ground. Now, there used to be onions in here, but I've already harvested the onions, and so some of the ground is now visible because it was being covered by the onions before. As you can see over there, some of the ground is visible now. That used to be covered with onions, but most of the ground is covered. I don't put a lot of mulch at the base of cabbage because I've done it in the past. However, putting mulch at the base of your cabbage encourages slugs, and slugs and cabbages are not a good combination. Now, your mulch is also good for frogs and toads. However, if you got more slugs than you do frogs and toads, then well, it's a toss-up, let's say. Rather than mulching my cabbage, I just make sure there are lots of companion plants, as you can see. Lots of calendula, lots of marigold. That's catnip right there that's gone to flower and seed. The yellow flowers you see, that's mustard. This, I'm not sure, but I think it's goldenrod. That over there, that flower right there is cutleaf coneflower. Of course, behind that, there's some wild bergamot. But yeah, lots of marigold, lots of calendula. And also, we have yarrow, which is great to have. Lots of yarrow, actually. And also, just very small, but at the base of pretty well, all along both sides, we have parsley that's just coming along. That we'll be able to harvest more in the fall and next spring. So once again, the ground is well covered in companion plants which repel the pests and keep the ground shaded. However, timing is important because when I transplanted my cabbages, well, I put the cabbages in first along with the onions. because onions don't grow too fast, and the onions were already growing. I wanted them to be already a little bit big because otherwise they wouldn't have gotten big at all. That's been my experience in the past. So I had already put them into 3/4 gallon pots. And so they were able to grow real nice and big. And then that cut leaf coneflower there, and this catnip here, and the goldenrod, and the sage, and the yarrow, all these plants, which are perennial, they're perennial companion plants, I cut them all down, almost down to the ground, and laid those plants on the ground as mulch. And some of the sunflowers, if they're already appearing, I cut them down too, and to allow them to just regrow again. And then it was only afterwards that I transplanted the calendula, the parsley, and the marigolds along the borders. Now, another part of the plan for the cabbage was for this sweet potato that I planted next to the edge of the cabbage patch to begin growing into the cabbage patch as it's doing here. So it's going to look for the sunlight in the cabbage patch, which are the bare spots, and hopefully it will fill them in, especially in this very hot time of the summer, because the sweet potato loves the heat. I'm also hoping that this sweet potato over this bunch here, as you can see, it's starting to come out. I'm hoping this stuff finds its way to this side, because in a few weeks these potatoes are going to start falling over and drying up, and it's going to be close to their harvest time. But if some of the ground can be covered by the sweet potatoes, that would be really good. Here's a plant that I've also watered about once a week over the last month, since the end of June until now, the end of July, and it is our Lofah. Because Lofah, just like cucumbers and watermelon, they need a lot of water, and the Lofah as well was one of the last things I transplanted into the garden. So it was already, the drier summer weather had already begun, and so that's what I've been doing. I've been trying to keep control on these 3 birdhouse gourd plants, 3 plants that have covered this side of this hog panel, because they grow a lot faster than the Lofah. These are many plants of Lofah here. Here on the other hog panel, a whole bunch more Lofah plants. And then some more here. This is another variety of Lofah, which I find gives the biggest Lofahs. There's one here for July 27th, and this one is already pretty big for July 27th. But it's a plant that grows a lot more slowly. It's only made it about this high, but I'm trying to keep, as why I haven't put any birdhouse gourd over here, because I want this basically to be exclusively for this Lofah. And these ones here, which grow really tall, much more quickly, let's say, well, they're only just starting to about to put their flowers out in their Lofahs. As you can see some of them getting started here. So we'll be starting to see those pretty soon. I've probably got about a dozen Lofahs that are forming now, having already flowered. Here's one over here. It's growing up the mustard, because there's no more room, because the birdhouse gourd's taken up all its space, so it decided to come over here and grow onto the mustard, which is good. It's already 2/3 of the way up to the top of the mustard, so that's good. So once again, at the base of the Lofah, what do we have? We've got parsley, we have mustard, and sometimes I'll just take some leaves like this, mustard leaves, and I'll just throw them onto the ground like that as a mulch. We've got the sunflower there. These taller plants are all on the north side, so they're not shading it out. And then over here, we have some peppers, and of course the sweet potatoes that are shading the ground. And also, on one end, we have some leaf mulch. This section of our garden is the beet section, right here. And this is another section which I believe I've only watered it once in the last month. And that's because I was still harvesting the lettuce, and lettuce likes a lot of water. You can see the remnants of the lettuce. Even when it was bolting to go up to flower, I was still harvesting it. As you can see, here's some here. And then of course, here's some that I've allowed to bolt. And so at the beginning of the season, up until about a week ago, there was all these spaces that you see between the beets were all filled in with lettuce. Now here's some more right there, some lettuce. Here's some more right there. But now I've harvested all, and so now we can see the beets now. And so the ground is getting a little bit drier here. However, beets being a root vegetable, beets have a very, very, very deep taproot. And so even though the ground is a little bit drier here, it's not only drier because it's not mulched here, it's also drier because it's right next to all these trees, which are immediately to its west. And so all these trees, well, their roots go right into this section. This whole section of the garden gets the tree roots in them, and so they're drying this section up. But however, the tree roots also do that to this section where the cabbage is. But as you can see, the cabbage is doing fine. Now, we've built up the soil so much in the last 6 years that it doesn't affect, the tree roots don't affect the garden as much. Used to be in our first year, our cabbage and kale and stuff, the plants didn't get higher than this in the first year because it was just so arid in this section of the garden because it was right by the forest. These are another section I haven't watered. They're just finishing up. We got a few plants that are still flowering, which is nice. The others, I'm letting them dry so that we can have some dried peas in the winter. Although I'm still gonna, probably today or tomorrow, I'm gonna do a few harvests of some nice green peas that we can shell and freeze them for the winter. But this is an area I've not watered once since June. And as well, here we've got some dwarf sorghum. Haven't watered this once since June. And we've got some purple barley. Haven't watered that. Purple and black barley. Haven't watered that at all since June. And then, of course, we've got more marigolds here. We've got the green cabbage, which is a much slower growing cabbage, but it's starting to form its heads. Haven't watered that as well since June. And then we have our carrots, which I also haven't watered since June. And I'm gonna have to start thinning these ones out. I've been taking thinnings of the ones out back. I haven't started taking thinnings of these yet. You can see the onions are pretty well done. The carrots just took them over. Let's pull the carrots, see what they look like. Because I'm gonna have to start pulling these guys. That's pretty good for end of July. As you can see, if you look at the thin root at the end here, that gives you an idea of how long this carrot's going to eventually be. The whole root will fill out right to the end of that tip there by, let's say, sometime in September. So that's I'm pretty happy with that. Last year they were a lot smaller than that here. And considering how thickly I've planted them, I'm happy with that. They're doing better. They're doing a little bit bigger at this time of year, the ones that are out in the out back in our compost garden. Next, I'm going to take it to our pumpkin patch, but before I do that, I just want to have one last look at the three sisters here to see how some of the beans are doing. As you can see, they're starting to produce, which is really nice. What I like about the pole beans is you can harvest them standing up. You can see some small ones there. Flowers right up to the top. And if you like hummingbirds, well, hummingbirds love pole beans and they visit the flowers all the time. Here are a few beans that I harvested the next day. Now right behind me here is the pumpkin patch. And you can see some of the squash that has my feet right here, and you can see some of the corn. Most of the corn you see are from the side shoots that regrew. Just that tallest one isn't a side shoot, but all the other ones are side shoots because the main shoot had been eaten by the raccoons, deer, or turkeys. But look at how big those side shoots are. I spoke to you about this in another video. Now, I can't get any closer right now because the plants are doing real well and they're not letting me in, and I don't want to step on them or step over them, you know, bend their leaves or whatever, so I'm just leaving them alone. Belongs to them right now. And you can, I don't know if you can see it further behind, but here, because this is the southernmost portion of our pumpkin patch, I didn't put any beans here because I didn't want to shade out the pumpkins sort of here and behind them. So the beans start a little further back. So all we have in this section is corn and squash. And that's why some of this corn really got, at the beginning, got a little bit decimated. But I'll show you the beans in a sec. But once again, as you can see, you can't really see any ground behind me. The ground is all covered. It's all shaded, and these vines they're prickly as well, so the little animals don't really like them. So now that the squash is really developed, it's doing a better job at protecting the corn, and it's also doing a better job at keeping the soil shaded and moist. And once again here, when I have done some weeding, I've always put it all right back down, and any of the corn stalks that got eaten or whatever, I put those right down onto the ground. There are some that I'm seeing if I can get roots out of them. They're in water right now, in a bucket of water. One of them looks like it might get some, but we'll see. The jury's still out on that one. Can a broken corn stalk sprout roots from its stem nodes? We'll see. So now let's have a closer look at how some of these plants are doing. But in behind me, I don't know if you could, there's some mustard, the yellow flowers. There's mustard there, right here. There's a sunflower. There's sunflowers a little bit everywhere back here. And then of course the corn, beans, and squash. There's a little bit of Joe Pye weed too. There's some yarrow behind me as well. So let's have a closer look. So there's where I was standing just a minute ago. There's what you're looking at. Now, I chose this area 6.5 years ago for a pumpkin patch because it's right next to our rain garden. So this area here is where water collects after a rain. Well, we made it into a rain garden. The whole area here used to be flooded, but we basically concentrated where the water collects to this area, and it collects there and it stays there unless it overflows. Then we've directed the overflow elsewhere. And so we have some native plants here that love the water, like this is sweet gale. We've got some cardinal flower. And of course we have the elderberry, which is doing wonderfully. We have basket willow. My goodness, I cut all that basket willow back in the spring, and now look at it. And we have some other flowers too. I don't remember all the names, but there are quite a few. We've got some weeds in there too, but anyway. And then if you look back there, you can see a lot of the teepees with the beans in them, and they're completely hiding the corn now. You can see some of the corn is forming some cobs. And let's look at how the beans are doing. And as you can see, there's squash, beans, and corn. Beans are just starting to be ready to, maybe in a week I'll be harvesting lots and lots of beans, and I'll be harvesting them right up until the end of August. Here are a few right here. I harvest the green beans right up until the end of August. There should also be purple beans here. I don't see any of those yet. There's some more beans right here. There should be some purple beans, but anyway, I harvest them whether they're green or purple or multicolored right up until the end of August, and then after that, whatever keeps growing, I let dry, and you let it dry completely to have beans over the winter time. There we go. There's our pumpkin patch. Got some curly mallow here. It's pretty. Over there, the grain you see over there, that's our Williams sorghum. It's one of the last ones I planted. Now, what I forgot to say about the pumpkin patch is, apart from when I sowed everything, I haven't watered it. So I have not watered this pumpkin patch once in the last month. There are those corn stalks. I'm seeing if they can sprout roots in that bucket of water. So yeah, the pumpkin patch is yet another spot in the garden that I have not watered. So let's do a wrap up. I've shown you basically most of the garden. I haven't shown you absolutely everything, but I've shown you basically to give you a good idea. What we've watered a little bit, what we've watered next to nothing, and what we haven't watered at all. Mainly because of mulching and also training those plants to look for the water and not overwatering them. You overwater your plants and they keep shallow roots. You don't want to do that. So basically, none of the three sisters. In the last month, we have not watered any of our three sisters, nor have we watered any of our grains, our sorghum, our barley, our millet. None of those have we watered. We haven't watered our potatoes. In fact, the potatoes we haven't watered all season. We didn't water our garlic either. You know, especially, you know, the potatoes and the garlic is because they were in the garden since last fall, and so there's no way they needed to be watered. Their roots were very, very well established. When your roots are well established and you keep your soil mulched, you shouldn't need to water, unless of course you're in a completely arid environment. Now, you know, and once again, you overwater. You water every day, you're going to get shallow roots, and watering doesn't replace rain. So even if you're watering every day, that soil is going to dry up pretty fast, and those roots are shallow, so they're going to dry up. So do not water your plants every day. Don't even water them every second day. Try and water them as little as possible using the strategies that I've spoken about here. Now, what are the ones we have watered? Like I said, we've watered our watermelon and our loofahs about once a week over the past month. Also getting a rain about once a week. So that means they've received water twice a week. What else? Our cabbage, we've only watered maybe twice in the last month. And our cabbage, and what else? And another one we haven't watered in the last month, or maybe we only watered once, was our beets. And that's about it. The plants I forgot to mention in this recap are the tomatoes and peppers, which I've only watered once in the last month. I didn't mention the peas. I didn't water them at all in the last month. And I mentioned that I didn't water the garlic at all. What I meant was in the last month. I watered the garlic once, sometime in late June, when we were really not getting any rain and it was looking a bit stressed. But it was at least a good 3 weeks before I harvested. I hope you liked the video. Hope you found it interesting and you learned something from it. If you liked it, then please give it the thumbs up and share it with your friends. Share it with lots of your friends. And if you have a comment or a question, don't forget to leave it. As you know, I respond to all your questions and all your comments. And if you know, as you're starting to plan for next year, think about us for getting seeds from our seed catalog. We're probably going to have even more seeds available for you this coming fall, and actually they're going to be ready. You know, they're going to be ready very, very soon, much sooner than last year. You're going to be able to start ordering them already in the fall. In fact, we already have seeds now, but however, when you start to plan for next year, well, we can have a lot of seeds for you. Thank you very much for watching. Have a wonderful week, and we will see you next time. What you're looking at here is a hummingbird moth, or a hummingbird clearwing, Hamaris thisbe, and it's in the hawk moth family, native to Ontario and likely to the whole Carolinian region. It can also be found elsewhere in North America. The call you just briefly heard in the background is an eastern gray tree frog. I believe this is called a hummingbird moth.